Hello classy people, this is Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Headlander. Sometimes I forget about how crazy and weird video games were back in the day, what with all the grim, serious titles that have been released in recent years. But every so often, I get a reminder of just how weird and wonderful video games can be. Headlander is one such reminder. So let's take a look at this latest release from Double Fine. Headlander is set in the distant future, in a universe where humanity has long since thrown off the shackles of their squishy flesh prisons to transfer their consciousnesses into an almost endless fleet of replaceable robots. This world is under the rule of an AI by the name of Methuselah, who manages to control the populace through the use of emotion-dampening devices known as Omega Gems. The last flesh and blood human is awoken from stasis to help combat the malevolent Methuselah. However, only their head manages to survive the process. This turns out to be less of a setback than you might expect, as the Headlander is equipped with a special helmet that allows flight, as well as the ability to interface with robotic bodies. With these newfound gifts, it's up to you to restore humanity to your people. Despite the potentially heavy subject matter, Headlander's writing generally leans towards a more quirky, comedic style. I'd still find myself questioning the nature of humanity with regards to the game's robotic populace, but it would always be between a decent chuckle or two. On top of the game's comfortable tone, there are a good couple of twists and turns, making it difficult to predict just how the story would unfold. Headlander's oddball tone is helped along by a number of factors. Its groovy synth soundtrack, brightly coloured lasers, and retro sci-fi aesthetic give it a uniquely charming style. It's almost like Bioshock, but with shag carpet and disco instead of the deep sea and overwhelming despair. The often goofy tone remains consistent with solid voice acting, from the inane chatter of emotionally dampened civilians to the sassy backtalk of the colour-coded security doors. Your long-term companion, Earl, is surprisingly delightful too, and his constant voice in your ear isn't nearly as annoying as some games' radio support can be. Headlander's core gameplay, on the other hand, doesn't manage to stay as consistent as the overall presentation. For the most part, it's an inventive spin on the so-called Metroidvania genre, but there are aspects that simply end up aggravating me. The core concept of being able to switch from body to body is a neat way of turning basic traversal into a puzzle, as certain areas can only be navigated with special robots, and coloured doors will only open for bodies of the corresponding colour. Having to swap from body to body in order to navigate the world keeps the moment-to-moment gameplay from becoming boring, but I found that an over-reliance on coloured doors often made traversal a needlessly complicated slog. In smaller, less colour-varied areas, this mechanic keeps the basic traversal from becoming stale, but when you're in a multi-room, multi-level area with a handful of different coloured doors, Headlander becomes annoying, as you're forced to navigate convoluted paths just to retrieve a special coloured body that spawns 10 rooms away. With that in mind, the game does do some pretty interesting puzzles within enclosed areas, such as the chess-themed battle arena that requires you to transport bodies from one end of the battleground to the other, all while keeping them from blowing up under the constant laser fire. It makes you adapt to the various bodies and their unique capabilities, while also testing your combat abilities under pressure. Speaking of combat, confrontations in Headlander can be resolved in a number of ways, but you'll usually just blast away at enemies with your wall-bouncing lasers. With the ability to mark out your laser's trajectory, you can pull off some pretty sweet trick shots, which are applicable in both combat and puzzle situations. There's also a surprising amount of variety to be found within each robot weapon. Some weapons shoot in bursts, others have spread shots, and some bodies use their massive upper body strength to explode their opponents with uppercuts. However, you aren't totally reliant on stolen robot bodies to protect yourself. As a floating head, you're able to vacuum the heads off of hostile bots, rendering them useless to all but yourself. You can also deflect bullets with your unlockable shield, and blast foes to pieces through the use of your unlockable boost attack. These unlockable maneuvers basically allow you to progress to new areas of the world, just like any good Metroidvania game would have. Unfortunately, there's really not a lot of special moves to keep your progression feeling satisfying. Sure, you can upgrade these abilities to give yourself secondary perks, such as charging items you vacuum so that they explode on impact, but I honestly forgot that the game's upgrade tree even existed. It goes to show just how non-essential these secondary abilities really are. Aside from its less than stellar skill tree, Headlander has a fair amount to offer in terms of content. The core objectives can take about 5 hours or so to polish off, but there are plenty of side missions to complete and hidden upgrades to search for. I'm not so sure that it's worth looking into, however, if only because of the occasionally convoluted methods of getting from point A to point B. I don't know if I could stand dealing with some of those areas more than once, to be honest. But aside from the occasional convoluted mess created by the overuse of color-locked doors, I enjoyed a lot of what Headlander had to offer. Despite some messy traversal, the core body swap mechanic is a neat idea, and the shooting gameplay is simple, yet fun. Add to that a unique story that mixes a rather serious subject matter with a quirky comedic tone, and you have something that certainly stands out from the crowd. Headlander gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of good. I have my issues with Headlander's gameplay, but its writing, visuals, and overall tone kept me hooked for the game's duration. If you're looking for something a little bit weird, or just can't get enough of Metroidvania style games, then Headlander might have something just for you. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative. If you missed last week's review of Fury, or my top 10 best bosses list, click the annotations. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm trying not to lose my head over here. Get it? 'Cause heads. It's a game about heads.